My name is James O'Mara. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Born and raised in a Christian home, and I always felt that I was the baby of 4 children, 3 older sisters, and church was an obligation, but it wasn't for me. I wanted the good life. I wanted to have fun, and I figured I'll do Jesus when I get older. Went through, did the whole rebellious kid stuff, smoked pot, drank, fooled around. But God was always in the back of my mind. I always knew eventually I had to get back to Him, but I thought, okay, I'll do it when I'm in my 20s. And then my 20s turned into my 30s, my 30s turned into my 40s, and, just kept running. So finally I came back. I had to come back home when I was in my late 40s, early 50s, because my dad was dying of dementia, and so I was taking care of him. And then he died back in 2010, and then 2 years later, my mother got sick with pancreatic cancer, and so I ended up taking care of her, and then she died, and then after the estate and everything was settled, I got a nice little chunk of change from our inheritance. The money was going to end up running out probably by the end of August. So I wanted to get a train ticket to go out to California, because I figured I might as well make this my last hurrah. And I knew that once I got out there, I knew I wouldn't have a home or probably be living on the streets, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away, and I'd basically given up. And I remember the one leg of the trip was heading to Salt Lake City. I thought, well, I don't think it's a good idea that I spend the middle of the night in a city that I don't even know. And I looked at my bus ticket. The next stop was Reno, Nevada. And I had enough power in my cell phone, to find out where the men's shelter was, because I figured I'm either going to be on a men's shelter or I'm going to live on the streets. And I've never been on the streets before, so I figured, well, at least I'll take my chances in a men's shelter. And so the next morning, or whatever the morning was, as I got up and I went to the front desk at the Motel 6, and I said, where's the 4th Street shelter? And she says, oh, it's about I said, how long of a walk is it? And she goes, oh, that's a good walk. It's probably 20, 25 minutes. And so I looked at my bag, and I had like $5 bills left. I had $5, and I says, do you know how much a cab would be from here to the shelter? And she says, I have no idea. I says, well, call the cab if you would. And I says, and I'll just tell the cab driver I have $5 and take me out as far as it'll take me. I'll go from there. So she calls the cab, and a couple minutes later, the cab pulls up, and I go to get in the cab, and this other guy grabs the handle of the door, and I'm like, oh, you ordered a cab, go ahead. And he says, no, whatever. He says, where are you headed? And I says, I didn't really want to tell him where I was headed. I was kind of embarrassed, but I said, well, I'm headed to the 4th Street men's shelter. And he says, really? He says, I work there. We go to this warehouse. I forget exactly where it was, but it was just this big warehouse with these real thin mattresses, and they're all right next to each other. And it's my first night sleeping on a mat, like this little thin mattress, and the guy next to me I can barely breathe because of the stench from his body odor, and the guy the other side of me, he's so drunk that he's kind of throwing up and whatever. And I thought, well, this is my life now, just deal with it. And so they ended up taking me down to Carson Behavioral Health, and it was just a whole different scene from the shelter. It was there was trees, there was grass, there were hills, I had the mountains. We had time outside, and it was just all of a sudden I could hear somebody talking to me, saying, there's something better for you. And while I was at Carson Behavioral, I met this guy. He was a biker, and he was an enforcer for a bike gang, and just this big dude with a mohawk and everything. And he says, hey man, he goes, I was told to give you something. And I says, what's that? He says, I just turned my life over to Jesus. And he says, I got this little book called Jesus Calling. And he says, I wanted to share this with you, and I thought maybe you should read this. So I did. And I just started reading, and all of a sudden, God started speaking to me like I've never heard Him speak to me before. And I said, okay, fine, I will. So I pull up Outlook Christian on the web, and there's Dan Dix, and this shiny white hair and everything. And so church is getting ready to start. And like a good Presbyterian, I sit in the back row and sit and listen, do the praise and worship. And I thought, man, this feels kind of comfortable, and everybody's laid back. Nobody's got a suit on, jeans and sweater is really comfortable. And up comes Dan, and he starts talking. He's just like, hey, listen, he goes, I know there's a lot of snow out there this morning. He says, but you guys made it. He goes, I see some new faces out there. He says, we're really glad you're here. He goes, as long as these doors are open, I'm going to be here, so I'm glad you're here. And he gave his message, and I don't remember what he said, but I know it was something that I've heard a million times before, but it was the first time I really heard it. God was saying, you know what? This is where you need to be. Welcome home.